So we just sang that song, We Three Kings. But to be truthful, we don't know if there were three kings, do we? Or the word Orient. We don't know for sure. That might be stretching it a bit too far. We call them three because they gave three presents: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And you might know their names. Does anybody else out there remember their names? Dawn knows it because?
Because of the little drummer boy.
Little drummer boy, that's right. There is Balthasar, right? Melchior, and Casper. But you know what? Those names are not found in the Bible, are they? They first appeared in an Italian church mosaic. That's where we got those names from. And we call them kings because of an obscure Old Testament reference to kings bringing gifts back in Psalm 72. And we say that they're from the Orient, but the Bible says that they came from the East. But we don't know how far east, do we? So most likely it was probably just from Persia, which is modern-day Iran. And we think of them as astrologers because they followed a star. And we call them magi because that is the Greek word that Matthew uses in his writing, magoi. Magi means magician or sorcerer. And we know that they must have been wealthy because they gave expensive gifts. And we call them wise men because that is how many English language Bibles translate the word magoi, wise men. That reminds me that I read an observation when I was putting this together that if it would have been wise women instead of wise men, they would have stopped and asked for directions. They would have arrived on time. They would have helped deliver the baby. They would have cleaned the stable while they were there. They would have made a casserole. They would have brought practical gifts such as diapers and formula and all that. And then there would also be peace on earth. But we love the wise men just as they are, don't we? Just as we see them every year in Christmas pageants. Kids and even men or women dressed in royal robes, bearing rich gifts, kneeling before the baby Jesus. And the kneeling part, that's true, by the way. Because Matthew tells us that when they saw the child, they fell down and worshipped him. Kings kneeling before the king. And that, I believe, is why this story is in the Bible. These men, they were not Jews. They were not biblical scholars. They were not clergy. They had not been devout followers of the one true God. And they were unlikely candidates, not the kind whom you would expect God to call to be actors in this beautiful little drama that gets played and replayed every year in every church around the world. But Matthew has lots of unlikely characters in his gospel, doesn't he? And keep in mind that many scholars, they count Matthew as the most Jewish of the Gospels, in part because he emphasizes the fulfillment of Jewish prophecies. But Matthew, he includes a number of Gentiles throughout his Gospel, almost from the very first verse. Matthew starts his Gospel with the genealogy of Jesus. And if you're a fan of the King James Version, you might know this as the begats. We all know this, right? Abraham begat Isaac, and Isaac begat Jacob. And, when we're just getting warmed up at the begats, Matthew tosses in a name that you wouldn't expect, does he? The woman is Rahab. You might not know that name, but you should. When Joshua sent spies to Jericho to take over the city, Rahab helped them. And she was unlikely here because Rahab was a harlot. She was a prostitute. And she was a Gentile to boot. But God rewarded Rahab with a place in history, didn't he? In fact, you could say that God actually adopted her into the family because she became one of those begats that led to the birth of Jesus. And then in the same verse, Matthew mentions Ruth. Ruth is another Gentile who got adopted into a Jewish family for doing the right thing. And there is a book in the Bible devoted to telling Ruth's story, and Jews read her book every year at the Feast of Weeks. And then come along these three wise men, Gentiles from the East. They're not Jews, they're not devout, they're not observant. But God gives them a place of honor in the story of Jesus' birth. think about that. We celebrate the story of these wise men every year, all over the world. People dress up in bathrobes to tell the story of these men coming to visit Jesus. There were many great people in the Bible, many great people, but how many of them get celebrated in this grand manner? How many? Practically none, is there? I mean, in this most Jewish of all four Gospels, only Jesus, Mary, Matthew have bigger roles than the wise men. And the shepherds, they get kind of equal billing there. And there were others too, other Gentiles, other unlikely candidates for glory. In this most Jewish of all the Gospels, Jesus' second great miracle is healing the servant of a Roman centurion. A Roman soldier, another Gentile. So the servant was paralyzed. We remember this story. The centurion came to and asked Jesus to heal him. Do you remember what happened next? Let's listen to this. Jesus said, "Shall I come and heal him?" And the centurion responded. He said, "Lord, I do not deserve to have you come under my roof, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes. And that one, come, and he comes. I say to my servant, do this, and he does it." You know, in other words, this centurion, a Gentile, he says, I understand authority because I live with authority day in and day out. And you, Jesus, you have authority. And Jesus responds to him. He says, "Truly I tell you, I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith." And then Jesus, he says to the centurion, "Go, let it be done just as you believed it would." And the servant was healed within an hour. There are other examples too in Matthew. For instance, when Jesus dies, a Roman centurion, a Gentile, an unlikely candidate for faith, says, surely he was the Son of God. So what's the point here? It's simply this. Throughout the Gospel of Matthew, which was written to speak to Jews, Jesus uplifts unlikely candidates for salvation, Gentiles, and he highlights their faith and their faithfulness. Rahab and Ruth, wise men from the east, Roman centurions, and lepers. Let's not forget them, and demoniacs, and paralytics, and tax collectors. Jesus lifts them up. He just lifts up these unlikely people. He commends their faith, and he heals them, and he calls them. And that's good news. And that's good news. Now, why is that good news? Who cares about Gentiles and lepers and paralytics and demoniacs and tax collectors who died over 2,000 years ago? Jesus cared about them. And that's the good news. Jesus cares about people whom everyone else just writes off. Jesus cares about people whom others consider to be the scum of the earth. Jesus cares about people who don't deserve it. And that means that there's hope for the whole world. You know, when I go online every morning and I read the newspaper, it's almost more than I can stand sometimes. The world it's a troubled place, isn't it? It's full of troubled people. There is so much hate and violence and treachery at work around the world that sometimes I'm tempted to despair. Tempted to believe that Satan is winning. Tempted to lose hope. But then I remember, Jesus cares. Not just about the good people, but also about the bad ones. And you can be sure that if Jesus cares, he is not about to give up on the world. There is hope. There is hope for the world. We cannot give up hope. We cannot give up on the world. And we cannot give up on any person because Christ has not given up. So this text that we read today, it places the burden on us. A burden to continue hoping, to continue caring, to continue loving, even the unlovable. But it also means that there's hope for us, for you, for me. We who are unlovable, you know, we're unlovable sometimes, aren't we? We've done bad things. I know that I disappoint Jesus every day of my life. I know exactly what the Apostle Paul meant when he said, "For I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do. This I keep on doing." And if you are honest with yourself, you can imagine Jesus being disappointed with you as well. But this story of the wise men and the whole Gospel of Matthew, it's a promise. It's a promise that Jesus has come to choose unlikely candidates, to redeem people who don't deserve it. So there is hope. There's hope for you, and there's hope for me, even when we don't deserve it. So each year, when we hear again the story of the wise men, celebrate the fact that God chose such odd people to be a part of history, to do his work. It's God's way of saying that he never gives up, that he has a place in his family for the unlikeliest of people, that everyone counts. And it's God's promise that no matter how unlikely a candidate you might be, God has a place for you, an important place, a place that nobody else can fill, and a job that nobody else can do. Just imagine for a moment that the wise men had refused to follow that star. What a hole there would be in the Christmas story, you know? If you say, "I have no special talents," or "let someone else do it," or "I don't want to get involved," you too will leave a hole in the Christmas story. Instead, let's do what the wise men did. When God calls us, when he calls us, whether to do great work or small, follow that star. Do what God asks. And if you will do that, just as he did with these wise men, God will use your faithfulness in ways beyond imagining. In the name of the